Alors, bonjour mes amis.
Hello, dear
C'est mon
friends.
plaisir de
It's my
vous
great
accueillir
pleasure to
pour cette
welcome you here
discussion sur un
for
sujet
our
tellement
talk
important,
on such an
même
important
existentiel
subject, even an
pour
existential
l'humanité.
one for
Je
humanity.
dois remercier les
I would like to
organisateurs du
thank the
Forum de Paris
organizers
pour
of the
l'appel.
Paris Peace
Je
Forum.
parlerai en anglais
I will be
car
speaking in
c'est un peu
English.
plus facile pour moi
It's a
et
bit
sans
easier
doute
for
plus
me and
convenable pour
probably
vos
more
oreilles.
comfortable for your ears
I
as
will now
well.
speak in English. Après deux ou trois verres de vin, le français
After a few
recommence,
glasses
mais
of
c'est un peu
wine, I
tôt.
can speak French, but it's a little early for that.
It is a great pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for being with us on the weekend. My name is Stuart Patrick. I'm a senior fellow, a director program in global order and institutions at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington. I'm honored to chair this session on COP27 and climate change and to be joined by four wonderful panelists and also a special guest. The panelists include Ian Borg, who's the former foreign minister of Malta, Giuseppe Sala, who is the mayor of Milan, Saoko Ishii, the former head of the Global Environmental Facility and the now vice president of the University of Tokyo, who is joining us by video, and Asuncena Chaidez, who runs the Environmental Impunity Project from Mexico. We'll also play a brief video message from Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who, as you all know, is the founder of the C40 coalition of cities, which is a lot more than 40 cities now involved in the combat against climate change, and of course is the former mayor of New York City. So, as you can tell, we are a multi-stakeholder panel that is appropriate. It's as it should be. We include people with experience in national government, international organizations, municipal government, think tanks, academia, and civil society. This is again appropriate because this crisis requires a whole of society, indeed a whole of planet approach. The question before us is, can COP27 in Sharm el-Sheik, Egypt, change the trajectory of climate change and global responses to it? At first glance, I must say things don't look promising. In Glasgow last year, we heard a great many promises and commitments announced with great fanfare, but the implementation of that has been badly off track. Few countries have submitted their updated nationally determined contributions, and in terms of emissions, they need to decline by 45% by 2030. They are on pace to decline by 3%. There is no conceivable path to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the UN concluded 2 weeks ago. Once rare disasters are now commonplace, and scientists say that worse is yet to come, as including a potential tipping points that might be reached that throw the world even more into crisis. Meanwhile, this climate crisis isn't occurring in isolation. This obviously the theme for this forum is the multi-crisis, and it's unfolding against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, U.S.-China frictions, energy and food insecurity, surging inflation and mounting debt, supply chain disruptions, not to mention the recovery still halting from a global pandemic. In other words, the diplomats in Egypt have their work cut out for them. They need to broker a deal that considers climate, geopolitics, and energy security, among other things. And on these issues, East and West, North and South are often quite divided. The continued growth in emissions places a huge burden on adaptation and carbon removal. And in addition to that, obviously, there are growing calls for climate reparations, loss and damage, which are quite controversial. All in all, this is a relatively dismal picture. The question before us is whether or not maybe COP27 might change this trajectory. To kick us off, we're going to begin with perhaps a slightly hopeful video message, which we need right now, a dose of optimism, from Michael Bloomberg, one bright spot on this otherwise dark horizon. After it ends, I'll engage each of our panelists in conversation, but if we could have the video from Mayor Bloomberg, that would be wonderful.
And thank you for coming to the Paris Peace Forum, an opportunity to tackle some of the greatest challenges we face, especially climate change. The news of severe droughts, floods, wildfires, and other extreme weather is a solemn reminder that the climate crisis is here right now, and it requires urgent action right now. With the leadership of President Macron and so many others in government, business, philanthropy, and civil society, we really can make a difference. Here at Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies, we're continuing to find new ways to do just that. For instance, we're working with President Macron to build a new net zero data platform that will make sustainable finance data more transparent and open to the public. We're also accelerating investments in clean energy, helping cities take bold action, and protecting our oceans and coral reefs. I was just at COP27, where all these topics are currently under discussion. But coming out of COP, we all need to move from discussing to doing, and that means working hard and working together. And that's what this forum is all about. So thank you for being a part of it, and all the best.
It's great to hear those words of inspiration from Michael Bloomberg, who has done an incredible amount building on his work in New York City to bring an entirely new set of actors to bear. And we'll be hearing from Giuseppe Sala in a minute about what cities have been doing. But first, I'd like to turn, starting at the multilateral level and at the official government level, to Ian Borg, who we're delighted is joining us here. Foreign Minister of the Republic of Malta, former infrastructure minister as well. You know, you've had a front row seat since Glasgow to climate negotiations. How do you think global developments over the past year have changed the landscape? Obviously, we've had the war in Ukraine, other things. How have they changed the landscape of climate diplomacy? President Biden showed up yesterday and tried to inject a note of energy and optimism into the talks. But looking at what's transpired in Sharm el-Sheik so far, should we be optimistic that this might make a difference in terms of mobilizing greater collective action? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I know Malta will also be taking up a role as a non-permanent member of the Security Council in January. And I wonder whether or not climate might feature in that presidency. But please.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So, if we have to be honest, I mean, yes, the landscape changed. A lot of things happened in the past year since Glasgow. So, the Ukraine war took center stage, and if not the fact that you have a war in the center of Europe, countries across the world are indirectly being affected. You mentioned several crises that we are experiencing, energy, food supply, inflation, and we can continue to mention all the challenges. So yes, I think that climate change was backslided in certain countries' climate agenda, and that is somehow worrying. So it was also opportune to meet in Egypt to not only remind ourselves of the Paris principles, of the commitments we reinforced in Glasgow, but also the fact that this is an imminent threat. And this is not like the pandemic. No one was predicting, or no one was expecting the COVID pandemic. This is scientifically proven, and this has been coming for a long time now. So if we let the climate catastrophe hits us, like Secretary General Guterres remarked in Sharm el-Sheik, I think we will be the ones to blame for all future generations. There's also an interesting development when you speak about the landscape, because this year COP is taking place in Egypt. Next year is in the UAE. So two Arab countries, which is a positive. The fact that there's a shift in thematic and geographic focus, Africa-centric, this is all good, but we still have to remember that no one is immune of climate change. Let's look at the floods in Pakistan, the hurricanes in the Caribbean, the hottest summer in Europe in the last 50 years, and Africa's water stress. So no one is immune, and we must deliver on Paris and Glasgow commitments. Well, the fact that our leaders were all in Egypt shows their commitment, their ambition. But at the end of the day, it's not a yearly commitment. It's much more than that, and the response has to be on a daily basis. The decisions we take, the actions that follow up. Also because this crisis is quite systematic, with intertwined circumstances, political, security-wise, yes, and I will come to the point of the Security Council, and also socio-economical. We are doing our part. We're the smallest EU member state, and I have to make a small remark that small states are most probably those who contributed least to this crisis, not least the least developed countries, but they are the most suffering and the most exposed in all this. So there's also an element of climate justice, and that's why we're doing our part. We are part of the EU bloc. We are doing our best to legislate the EU Fit 55, but it's not only about legislating, then it's about implementing. So we are doing our best to be climate neutral by 2050. This can be achieved by a lot of effort. Climate discipline, sound fiscal and monetary policies, renewables, strong energy policies, and electrification. It's also a change in culture. So governments, the big industries, NGOs, but also the public. I mean, there's a whole shift in the way we were used to so far in order to achieve all this. I believe that also as an EU bloc, we're doing a lot, but we must do more when it comes to financial assistance because of the climate justice I already referred to. We have to assist those who contributed the least to all this crisis, but they are the most suffering. I had a very particular meeting a couple of weeks ago with the president of Kiribati, an island state that is on the verge of disappearing. So they already got another island in Fiji in order to shift the whole population, more than 100,000. So this is what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And that's why, being an island state, we would like to do our part as well, not only financially, not only in the EU bloc, but also do our best to assist other islands. And that's why the Prime Minister of Malta in Glasgow launched the Island for Islands initiative, which was reiterated this week in Egypt, but also we started to take action. How? By sharing our lessons learned, our expertise. For instance, water management. Giving more scholarships to small developing island states. And this will feature prominently also in February, when we will be presiding the Security Council as an elected member in our signature event, an open debate on how we can assist the SIDS, the small island developing states, because there's a lot at stake. I mean, not only the fact that the citizens, be it on the low-lying islands, coastal areas, and therefore the displacement of the population, but also when it comes to sovereignty. So, what rights do you have if your country literally disappears? So what are we going to do? The international instruments today do not cater for this, and that's why we want to discuss the effect of the sea level rise on these small island states, especially those developing ones. We will do our part and share our best experiences, but of course we cannot solve the problem on our own.
Thank you very much. That's a terrific beginning, and I just want to make a couple of reflections and then turn things to Mayor Salah. One of them is that it's very interesting that you're going to bring this up in the Security Council. As you know, there has been a lot of resistance to actually introducing climate change within the Security Council. People think it detracts from traditional security, but of course, as we were discovering, traditional security needs to make a little bit more room for some of these other existential threats that are occurring. So I think that that's a really terrific initiative. And you also raised the issue of sovereignty. The responsibilities of sovereignty need to be rethought, is my humble opinion, in the age of climate change, because the obligation should also be not to create trans-border harms. That's already a principle that exists in international law, and that's probably one of the bases for the loss and damage claims, is that in fact people have not been fulfilling their sovereign responsibility, not least my own country that has a significant role in contributing to the accumulated greenhouse gases, and so one needs to think about these things. Now, I'd like to turn to Mayor Salah now. Given the shortcomings in multilateral cooperation, which are all too evident, many people are looking towards cities and other subnational units to fit in to try to fill this gap in climate action. And for cities, this is particularly important because there's already a strong majority of people around the world that actually live demographically, that actually live in cities, and this could get up to about 80% by 2050 or 2060. So we're talking, the 4/5 of humanity living in urban environments. So I'm interested in how you see cities as helping to fill this gap. I know that you have been a leader of the C40 Cities Coalition at the Mayor's Migration Council, and you also launched a global mayor's task force on climate and migration, as well as a global cities fund for migrants and refugees, which is one of the Paris Peace Forum sponsored projects. So can you explain how Milan and other cities are responding to the climate emergency, including in dealing with the flows of climate migrants, some call them refugees, that are basically being displaced, at least in part, by the consequences of a warming planet? Please.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. We all are following the activity, the works in Sharm el-Sheik, and apparently someone is saying the 1.5 degrees target, so to stay below an increase of 1.5 degrees, is quite impossible. It's very difficult, at least, and we know, but this can be demoralizing, can be frustrating, and we may or cannot be frustrated. We have to propose always, ever, actions new ideas because, I mean, our fellow citizens are asking us to have a solution, and that is fundamental for me. The first reason is the continuity. We are so close to our fellow citizens; they are asking every single day. Then there is another point I was telling you before this meeting. To give an example, the Italian example, and we have our ambassador. We had 71 governments in the 77 years after the Second World War. So 71 governments in 77 years. I am mayor since 2016, and I will complete my second mandate in 2027, 11 years. So we have time to act. We are forced to act. We have to force to propose long-term action. On the meantime, we have to work on the day-by-day activity. In general terms, what I'm seeing is that 3/4 of the global cities are reducing emissions faster than their nation. And this is fundamental. It's, a technical view. 3/4 of the main cities in the world. On the meantime, we have 60 cities who are telling us we can stay in the 1.5 degree. We have a solid, serious plan to stay in that target. So from one side, we are committed. We are serious. We want to play our role. We want to give demonstration that we can do it. On the meantime, we are asking the government to play their role. And for instance, again, going back to Sharm el-Sheik, we are asking the government to confirm the promise of invest 100 billion euros per year on the climate issue, because they promised. So they have to confirm. On the meantime, we are asking them to have a direct fund to cities, of course, demonstrating what we can do. Let me give you some example on my city, on Milan. First of all, it is clear that now we see a very, very clear nexus between climate and migration. According to a new study recently released in Italy, we see new migrants from a flow of migrants from Bangladesh or North Africa, so from countries where partially they face political problems and time wars, but always they are facing a climate modification and problem with the agriculture, problem with the economy. While in Italy we have now more or less 9% of, let me say, not people of not Italian origin, we can call them immigrants, but in reality most of them are already Italians. In Italy, in Milan, we have 20%, and Milan is working. I can tell my ambassador, sometimes it's working better than the country. So it is difficult. Integration is not so simple, but we need to manage that. Mainly in this historic period, we are receiving a huge amount of money from Europe through the Next Generation EU. And we need to, we had this opportunity, but we have to make a reform, and we have to commit all this money in a short time, because all the European countries who want to use these funds have to commit all the money for the end of 2023, which is apparently crazy. My country has a global amount of 220 billion euros. So we need people. We need, we can offer many new jobs, not only essential jobs, for sure. But let me give you the example some example in Milan. First of all, we are working on the zero waste discipline, on the zero waste method. And this is true for everything. For instance, on food, we are working on the canteen of our primary school, asking the student to bring home the bread or fruit they do not eat when they are at school. On the meantime, we reached 65% of collection of waste in a separate form: glasses, plastic, paper, organic, and so on. And the rest is burned, producing energy. We are working on the energy efficiency, for instance, retrofitting most of our buildings. We are working on the sustainable mass transportation. So we are creating new jobs. And you see, always trying to put together a solid action on the climate change and pollution and the creation of new jobs. We are in a good location for living close to the sea and close to the mountain, to the lakes, everything. But in the meantime, we are in a sort of plateau with a scarcity of wind, so we are naturally polluted. We need to invest on public transport. We are opening in couple of weeks. We are opening the fifth metro lines, and I am inaugurated that, and the metro line starting from the city airport in Linate, and in 14 minutes you can get the dome. So in 14 minutes, with €2, you can get the dome. You can reach the dome from the city airport. But just to give you some examples, our belief, our idea is that always than never, we can create new jobs. We can create new jobs, and on that we need new Italians in some way. The cities need to work having a long vision on the same time to work very fast. This is the reason for which we created 1 year ago this council, the Mayor Migration Council. We have a couple of dozen of cities already working with us. The last one who share this council is London. The idea is even to address private funds. In the first year, we addressed all the funds to Africa because it's fundamental for them. To give an example, there are cities like Freetown who are working on to plant trees and protect the cities. In the meantime, there are cities like Beira in Mozambique who are working on unused public houses to shelter people escaping from difficult situation. So they need money, they need, of course, even technology. We are supporting them. So the first stage is to help directly those cities in south, and then to move to north. But the only opportunity we have is to create good channels to share experience, to tell the same words to everyone. So my conclusion is that we have so many demonstrations that climate change is not a risk, it's a reality. And it's not anymore the time to convince people, because, if you are not convinced now, look at the weather in Paris in these days, look the weather everywhere in the world, look the tragedies. So now it's the time for action, and cities are in a perfect condition to show that through action we can change the situation.
Thank you very much, Mayor Sala. It's highly inspirational, and I think also your point that the climate crisis is now. For a long time we imagined it was something in the future. You remember when the Gilets jaunes protests were occurring in this city, And there was some complaints amongst protesters. Monsieur Macron, he's talking about the end of the world. We care about the end of the month. I think the thing that we are discovering is that the end of the world may be closer to the end of the month than we thought it was at the time, and that's creating a lot of problems. And we can't continue to defer dramatic action. I want to turn now to our colleague in Japan. Who, by the way, thank you so much for staying up in what must be a very late hour for you. I really appreciate it. Dr. Ishii, as I mentioned, used to head the Global Environmental Facility, and for that reason, my first question is really to her, and I'll state two questions. My first question is about financing. And in that regard, obviously, wealthy countries are still, 13 years after they promised that they were going to come up with $100 billion a year, still struggling to do that for adaptation and sort of accelerating the green energy transition in developing countries. Now, of course, they're being asked to also come up with money for loss and damage. And so I'm wondering if my first question is, based on your experience, what are the prospects for mobilizing climate finance on the massive order that's needed, including through private sector mobilization? And the second question is a little bit more conceptual, and that is, I know you direct a center for the global commons, which is about how does one manage the biosphere, right? The global commons that belongs to all of us and in a sense to no one, and climate change brings that out in great detail. So the question there is, can you actually have the cooperation that you need to deal with things like climate change in a system of almost 200 sovereign states, each pursuing their own national interests? So do you have any confidence in that? They're two very different questions, but please, over to you, Dr. Ishii, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. In fact, the light here in this room is not because I am staying late in Japan. I am talking to you from the hotel room with Sharm el-Sheik at COP27. And because that the internet and situation condition is not great, I actually came back to the hotel, and now from hotel room at the COP27, I am talking to you. So that's
wonderful.
That's the situation. So I can have a bit of the report to you actually in a very kind of realistic way. Let me just start with your second question about the global commons. I think it's helpful to think about your first question, your beginning question, that how you see the landscape has been changing or not changing, and changing in fact way. In fact, that in the Center of Global Commons point of view, or my point of view, what we are facing is basically system collision. The current economic and social system has been in collision with the planetary Earth system, and that's why we have been seeing so many multifaceted crises. It's not only climate crisis, but biodiversity loss and the land and ocean and soil, and even chemical crisis. Then food system crisis, another one. So that these crises are actually sharing the similar, actually common cause, or we the Anthropocene, that we human have been eroding the capacity of the planetary Earth, and the planetary Earth saying, no more, thank you, we can't take anymore. And that's why that it's our turn to change our economic system so that we can live in harmony with the planetary Earth system for the coming generation. And from that point of view, actually, yes, that those challenges are fueled by Ukraine's situation. Fundamentally, those crises are there. It's just exacerbated by Ukraine. So the important point here is that with that understanding, that it's very tempting to think that we can pause and wait and see the crisis may be gone. No, absolutely not. We really have to accelerate our transition to the economic transition to secure our better future. So that is maybe my first point, and in your opening question, and the role of the Global Commons Center. What is lacking is actually the governing mechanism, and it's basically that we still have this government to government and intergovernmental, maybe inter-sovereign governing system, which in my view is quite obsolete by now. And that's why that the Paris Agreement was very much supported by non-state actors. Even Glasgow last year, government failed the negotiation, but the big push came from private sector and non-state actors together. So that we now need to see that what is the best way to govern our global commons, and maybe that leaving the very traditional, conventional intergovernmental system and to create much more that diverse the way of thinking and governing the global commons. Well, we need another session to think about how that governing mechanism may look like. But this is my first question and my answer to your actually second question. Go back to your first question about the finance. Actually, I came here to the COP27 prepared for the much bad news or dire situation, the breaking down the negotiation or all the downward stream. But actually, I didn't see it yet. Maybe it's coming next week when we talk about loss and damage. But so far, the situation is more about, say, the no big announcement like last year. At the same time, no big breakdown yet. So that the people have been actually focusing more on the implementation side. And I can share with you maybe 3 things of this, what kind of implementation ongoing, including finance. The first one is that last year at Glasgow, it's a big announcement is ISSB, that the First Movers Coalition, and those kind of, how to count for the carbon and how to make sure that the transparency is in it. At this point of time, there are so many ways of counting carbon and so many ways of reporting and measuring, so that the discussion here is how to verify the verifiers, how to consolidate the way of reporting, and so that how we can make sure that we are making the progress in a compatible way. So that is the big discussion going here. So it's quite exciting to see that the people are now finally coming together to create those building blocks and consolidating building blocks to do the better measurement and of our progress, which is maybe linked to the fact that Michael Bloomberg talked about the big data initiative kind of thing. But second progress that I see is actually that last year at Glasgow, there is a discussion of the nature positive. It's not only carbon neutral, but nature positive. And nature positive is not killed yet, and it's still very much alive. So it's really good to see here that the colleague here are actually talking about how we can really flip the food system and take care of the natural capital, which is mentioned by Milano, mayor of the Milano, how to do this in the food system thing. So it's actually still very much alive. But the last thing, which maybe direct answer to you, is that the finance. 2 days ago, the Nixon and his team actually issued a report about finance for climate action, scaling up investment for climate and development. This is really a good report, and I'm saying that because I'm also part of the author team. But the point is that it's not really 100 billion. It's not that's not the. It was a different program, the trust program, but what the world needs is $1 trillion that every year to really push the needed investment. It's not just an amount of money, but it needs to be deployed wisely at the right place, at the right time, and for right purposes. So this new report is saying that we need $1 trillion every year. And actually that it's going to be going more than other years. But this is a growth story. It's not just on how to take care of loss and damage. It's more like on how each country and each sector can grow if the right finance is available, and then working together with public sector, but also the private sector and cities together, how we can really create the growth platform, the growth strategy. So that is a quite interesting report. I think the role of cities and the business are very clearly mentioned in it, so that I highly recommend that you take a look at it and see how we can really change the story of 100 billion. It's a trust game. To us, the coming together to find a way to mobilize this 1 trillion. There is a clear way that what the MDB should, what the DFI should, what the philanthropy could do, so that it's kind of very granular, that a roadmap or engineering pathway to get there. But it will give us more hope that there is a clear roadmap to get out of this mess and to see that the growth strategy of the 21st century. Thank you.
Dr. Ishii, thank you so much. That's incredibly, again, very inspiring to hear some of both the transformations in terms of ideas, placing value not just on human capital and financial capital, but frankly on natural capital, which is something that we've run down because we haven't measured it, we haven't invested in it. And what you're suggesting is now there are opportunities for also mobilizing finance that include nature-positive approaches to business strategies and investment, and that there are ways of mobilizing this, and that the private sector is obviously a huge factor here. And then, of course, the fact that big data allows one to make new approaches. I should just, in a shameless bit of self-promotion, I should note that I'm just finished a paper for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace on the form of sort of a new international environmental cooperation, which I call planetary politics, which is very much along the lines of what you're talking about. So we will talk later. But let's move on, though, because we have a wonderful final speaker to share her thoughts. It's Senora Asuncena Chaidez, who is our colleague from Mexico. She runs an exciting new initiative, which is also sponsored by the Paris Peace Forum, known as the Environmental Impunity Index of Latin America. I believe she started this initially looking in Mexico and then now focusing more on the continent more broadly. Basically, one of the assumptions, I think, is that the failure of many countries to deliver on their environmental pledges, including on climate, but also biodiversity and other things, reflects a lack of both institutional capacity and often a lack of political will. And that lack of political will is in part a lack of transparency and accountability that's being directed towards authorities. And these factors are facilitating environmental crime and undermining public trust. So from what I understand, you have a new tool to develop and increase accountability and transparency. Can you explain the logic behind this a little bit, and then how it unfolds in sort of practical terms? Because it sounds very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be in this panel. Listening to you and linking it to the tool that we have presented here in the Paris Peace Forum, I would like to share that if we are to commit to future generations, we need to understand, as it has been said, that the environment is not waiting. It won't wait on a specific administration or a political interest or that the economic interests are right. It's not waiting, and that's why the climate crisis is here. And we cannot ignore evidence. So the call for climate justice within the countries, of course, goes through financing, but it's not only finance, it's building capacities. It's building, and how to build these capacities. It also goes through data transparency, and that's part of the tool that we're presenting. If countries commit also to share data, to transparent the data, that builds trust. If you know where you're standing, if you know the evidence and the data transmits this evidence of where you're standing in specific issues, and what we propose with this tool is institutional capacity, yes, but also in degradations, where we're standing in degradation, and what we're doing actually to build this intergenerational strategy. And what we're proposing here is to build on a lot of data that right now, at least for the countries that we are analyzing right now, data is not available. It is not available. It is some sort of data. Yes, there is. It's out there and it's public, but a lot of it's not. And how do we build trust? How do we know where we're standing? And how do we know how to change? Or what is more urgent if we are not actually aware of where we are in certain issues? It is interesting that you were mentioning how to verify the verifiers, and that this is a trust game. Yes, it is a trust game. and a trust game that we're losing when we're not accessing open, complete data. We are only seeing the data that is allowed for us to see. But what we're building here and what we're proposing is to break this into very specific, actionable pieces of information, because these pieces of information actually build into action sooner than committing to the bigger area. And so if we need action now, we also need data now. Because how are we to move towards something if we don't know what the first step is? Yes, it is a big road, it is a long commitment, but we need to start somewhere. And that's where we are suggesting here with the tool of the Environmental Impunity Index. We built this for Mexico, we're building this for Latin America, and we suggest to build it for further countries. But what we're suggesting here is also to identify each country is different. Each country has different needs. Standards and information should be the same, but then how to build this toolkit, where to start, where to get started, where to do this first step. Well, if we don't have data, we can start where everything like these big commitments show, but that's not necessarily what each country needs specifically. So we need to build on specific data to identify where the bigger challenges are for each country and start where it's more concerning or more urgent. So what I want to convey here is that transparency builds trust. If this is a trust game, we need to open up. We need open data, transparent data, complete data that's systematized. And that might be very evident for some countries, but for developing countries, it's not. It's part of building their capacities. And building these capacities is also part of addressing this climate justice claim. I know it sounds like it's far away, but it's not. If we want to address this climate justice claim, we need to build trust. And to build trust, we need to build capacities, we need to build up on data, open, available data that might help us understand, identify how to get started with our first step, no? How to do the next step, what's the next more pressing issue, and to build in long-term ideas, not just the immediate term. And that's something that sometimes becomes very difficult for national countries. Because of course, we have this time span for administrations, and it's not really building for the long run. And that's why we need this open, transparent data information that might help us to track where we are standing and to identify clearly and transparently how this is being addressed. So as someone who's been working with this data, my claim and my request for you all is this: help us open up this data and make it available for everybody, so we can also help and identify where are these pressing first steps for our developing countries as well. So in Latin America, we don't have this as easily, as clearly as some other countries might find it. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you very much, Asunción. And I think that getting data and transparency that shed lights on things is always a good thing. And I think governments would be well reminded of that fact. Now we have about just over 5 minutes. At this point, we probably can take one question, and we'll see how we do after that. Does anyone in the audience have a question? If they do, if they could please raise their hand, I can call on you, and perhaps one of our people with a microphone might come by. There's a gentleman right there, kind of in the middle there. Okay, there we go. Coming to you. And please state your name and if you have an affiliation that we should know.
Sure. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Arne Lietz. I used to be a member of the European Parliament, and I'm now working for Brunswick Group in Germany, in Berlin. And thank you so much for this very promising work you are all doing on the networks. The question to me is, as we all are also working on the SDGs, how do you combine the Sustainable Development Goals? And are they actually a good tool for the cities, for the island-to-island initiatives, but also to the data requests? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a fascinating question, because of course the climate change, there's the climate change agenda, but there's also the global goals. I wonder if Mayor Sala, do you use the Sustainable Development Goals as sort of a measure of success within the mayor's coalition? I know that many of the goals are, a couple of them are directly related to climate, obviously one of them in particular, but many of the much progress on the goals depends on climate action. It's mutually reinforcing. Do you have any, do you use the SDGs explicitly?
No, you're right, and the question is perfect. I mean, one real difficulties is that we are trying, you talk about data, and even here it's a question of data. We should be in condition to tell the people, if you do that, if we do that, we see an improvement, we see a result. So everyone agrees on the way. Everyone knows that work on the environment is fundamental, but sometimes it's not so clear how we can combine action and result. And that is one of the ways where we have to improve. Again, in the cities, probably it is feasible. But it's a good question. I do not have a real, a clear reply. It's a question on which we have to work. Most of the cities, or the big cities, through C40, which is an organization collecting most of the biggest cities in the world, and the present president is the mayor of London and vice chair for Europe. So we are working on this way because there is a real ask from our citizens. So you wanna me have a different way to move in the city. You are asking me to leave my private car at home, but where is the result? You are asking me to modify my diet, to eat less meat. What is the result?
Yep. Thank you very much, and I want to give Asunción a chance to respond here. The one thing I just want to mention with the SDGs is that many of the SDGs are quite consistent with the climate pledges. There are other SDGs which are arguably in tension with the climate pledges. Or at least potentially in tension. One of them is the clean energy for all, right? The energy part of that, as you know, in the developing world, there's been a huge sort of backlash against this sense of, well, the wealthy world is telling us that we need to decarbonize as quickly as possible, but for the interpretation from many parts of the global south is that is basically saying, we'd like to keep you guys poor, please don't use any of the fossil fuels that you have at your disposal. And unless you're going to provide us with assistance to have renewable energy, et cetera, and that energy has not been forthcoming. So it's a very interesting question. Asunción, I might let you have the last word here since we're running out of time.
I'm going to be real quick
okay.
here. It is very important, and the request for that, of course, goes through also the SDG information. Most countries are committed to providing this information, but building information and providing that goes also through building capacities. You cannot provide information. It seems quite simple, but actually to provide data, you need to monitor it. And to be able to monitor, sometimes you need to establish a whole set of infrastructure to be able to monitor. So it goes through building capacities to be able to monitor and to be able to report accurately, to be able to provide this kind of information when you're asking someone to change their patterns of life. There are some other very interesting initiatives here in the forum also based on this idea of providing immediate information. But this is only that I wanted to say. Of course, a request for data goes also through these objectives of development. We use that for the index, but some countries are not being able to report on this, on their advancement in this index, in this objective development index, because they don't have enough capacities to be able to monitor and to report in consequence. So I think it goes through the same line again, no? Building capacity to be able to report, to be able to gather trustable data.
And Foreign Minister Borg, did you have a brief comment here, and we'll have to close out?
The good thing about the question and the good thing about the SDGs is that the solution is in multilateralism. So they emanate from the United Nations. Okay, we can argue on how binding they are or what happens to those who are not committed to them. there are then other layers. The EU bloc is committed to Fit for 55, and there's a guardian, the Commission, following what each and every member state is doing, but no great leader like President Macron, no principles like Paris can solve this on their own. So multilateralism is the solution, and also, once again, I reiterate the climate justice. So let's not forget those who are not doing enough because they do not have the resource, not because they don't want. And most probably they were the least to emit, to pollute, and contribute to the crisis.
Foreign Minister Borg, thank you very much for that reminder of an appeal to multilateralism in an age of transnational challenges. What we also have found in this panel is a multi-level global action is also required, from communities to cities to member states to our friend Professor Ishii, who worked in a multilateral organization. At all levels, action is going to have to be concerted. This has been a great pleasure. I'm not sure that we have solved the problem, but we have certainly pointed to a number of great innovations that are underway at multiple levels to try to get a handle and hopefully reverse this climate emergency. Please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers. That's great. That's really great. That was really fun.